The Constitutional Court unanimously upheld President Yoon Suk Yeol's impeachment on Friday, saying his martial law declaration on December 3rd seriously violated the Constitution. Eyes are now on what lies ahead for society, a snap election. The ruling party apologized following the verdict, while the opposition hailed it as a revolution. The international media was quick to deliver the news, calling the development a pivotal moment in Korea's democracy. It's April 4th, 8 p.m. in Seoul. This is Newscenter.
주문, 피청구인 대통령 윤석열을 파면한다.
Thank you for joining us. I'm Yoon Jung-min. We start with a ruling that will go down in the nation's history. Today, the Constitutional Court unanimously upheld the impeachment motion against President Yoon Suk Yeol. It ruled that he abused national emergency powers by declaring martial law, and this was a serious violation of the Constitution. The ruling came 122 days after the now former president declared military ruling. Our correspondent Oh Soo-young reports.
The current time is 11:22 a.m. Ruling. President Yoon Suk Yeol is hereby removed from office.
4 months after President Yoon Suk Yeol's December 3rd martial law, the Constitutional Court on Friday issued a unanimous decision to oust the nation's leader, immediately stripping him of his presidency. All 8 members of the bench decided to uphold the National Assembly's motion to remove Yoon from power, declaring his martial law declaration a grave violation of the Constitution and democratic principles, and a betrayal of public trust. Beginning at 11 a.m., Acting Chief Justice Moon Young-bae delivered the collective decision and reasoning, which showed the full bench upheld all 5 grounds for impeachment presented by the National Assembly on how Yoon's martial law disrupted the country's constitutional order. Yoon had made the unprecedented effort of defending himself in his impeachment trial alongside his lawyers. He argued that martial law had been his executive right under the Constitution, which allows the measure to be triggered in times of national emergency, with the need to maintain public order. Yoon has cited the opposition-led National Assembly's legislative abuse, budget cuts, and excessive impeachment motions against his administration as amounting to a state of national emergency. He also raised concerns of election fraud and concluded that he'd declared martial law as a warning or appeal to the nation. The court rejected Yoon's arguments as unacceptable and insufficient.
By declaring martial law in violation of the Constitution and relevant laws, the respondent reenacted the historical abuse of emergency powers, throwing citizens into a state of shock and causing disruption across all areas of society, economy, politics, and diplomacy.
The court found there to be no genuine emergency nor severe disruption of public order to justify Yoon's imposition of the controversial measure. While acknowledging intense political tensions and the opposition's impeachment motions, the court stressed that Yoon had the democratic tools to resolve political disputes without unconstitutional actions. Also, Yoon's martial law did not meet procedural requirements, as he did not sufficiently consult the cabinet, nor did he notify Parliament about his martial law proclamation. Second, the bench said Yoon deployed military and police forces illegally to obstruct the National Assembly, infringing on lawmakers' constitutional rights and undermining democratic governance. Third, Yoon's martial law proclamation banned political activities, violating citizens' basic rights. Also, the former president ordered unwarranted searches of the National Election Commission, breaching its independence. Lastly, Yoon infringed on judicial independence by attempting to locate former senior judges for potential arrest. The ruling comes 111 days after the court case began with the National Assembly's impeachment vote. 11 trial hearings and 60 witness testimonies were held. The deliberation took a record 38 days, 3 times longer than previous presidential impeachment cases. Yoon is now South Korea's second elected leader to be ousted by impeachment after former President Park Geun-hye was removed from office in 2017.
A historic day of reckoning for South Korean democracy. The ruling emphasizes presidential accountability and the urgent need for bipartisan compromise in a deeply divided political climate. As this chapter closes, South Korea moves forward, testing and reinforcing the strengths of its democratic foundations. Oh Soo-young, Arirang News.
The political fate of the prosecutor general turned president has ended in disgrace, with the remainder of his term cut short. After the ruling, he sent out a brief message. Our political correspondent Kim Do-yeon with the details.
Shortly after the Constitutional Court upheld the impeachment of President Yoon Suk Yeol, Yoon laid out a brief message through his legal representatives. While he didn't directly mention the Constitutional Court's ruling, he thanked his supporters and said, quote, "I am sincerely grateful for your unwavering support and encouragement, even when I fell short. I deeply regret not being able to live up to your hopes and expectations." Meanwhile, media caught the moment the phoenix flag, the symbol of South Korea's president, came down from the Yongsan Presidential Office building, signaling the end of President Yoon's 1,060-day presidency.
The office will be supporting acting President and Prime Minister Han Duck-soo, but at 3:30 p.m., the presidential office released a statement saying that the Chief of Staff for Policy, the National Security Advisor, along with all senior-level secretaries have expressed their intent to resign.
The acting president, however, rejected the resignations a few hours later, saying that the government needs to be in full operation. As for Yoon, however, he has now become a civilian. While he is still at the presidential residence and will have to leave, there are no clear rules for that, so we will have to wait. Former President Park Geun-hye left the former presidential Blue House 2 days after her ruling. Yoon is expected to return to his home in the Seocho-gu district of Seoul. From this point on, he will not be treated as a former president due to Friday's ruling. This means no presidential pension or a spot at the National Cemetery. The Presidential Security Service will no longer be fully protecting him, but because he has state confidential information, there will be a downsized security team to at least guarantee his safety for at least 5 years and 10 at the maximum. This also ties into his criminal trial. It'll now be much easier for the prosecutors to call Yoon in for further questioning, as he won't have an official security system around him. That wasn't the case until now, as we had seen some conflict between the investigators for the criminal case and the Presidential Security Service. In South Korea's legal system, if Yoon is convicted of leading an insurrection, he could face life in prison or the death penalty. Kim Do-yeon, Arirang News.
The impeachment of the president is more of a start than a final end, leaving behind a 4-month-long confusion in the country. With a snap election in mind, political parties were quick to send out messages of their own. Our National Assembly correspondent Shin Ha-young has more.
The reaction from lawmakers across the aisle stands poles apart at the National Assembly. The ruling People Power Party, which had hoped the impeachment would be overturned, fell silent as the court unanimously removed Yoon from office. Interim leader Kwon Young-se said that while the decision is regrettable, the party apologizes and accepts the outcome.
First and foremost, we sincerely apologize to the people. We take full responsibility for not fulfilling our role as the ruling party. We also regret failing to stop the Democratic Party's repeated legislative overreach and political tyranny in the opposition-controlled National Assembly.
PPP lawmakers gathered after the ruling to discuss the party's response and next steps, where its floor leader Kwon Sung-dong urged unity and emphasized the need to focus on winning the presidential election, which is just 2 months away. On the other hand, after the ruling, cheers broke out among the main opposition Democratic Party, which was at the forefront of the opposition-led push in the parliament to remove Yoon from office. The party welcomed the decision. DP leader Lee Jae-myung expressed gratitude to the public, saying they had taken back their democracy.
A sitting president being impeached for the second time is a tragedy that should never happen again in Korea's constitutional history. Now, a new chapter begins. With the people, we will work to restore livelihoods, peace, the economy, and democracy through unity.
With the Constitutional Court's decision to remove now former President Yoon Suk Yeol from office, rival parties are now set to kick off a 2-month race. All eyes are on the PPP, which had opposed impeachment, as the ruling could be a major blow with the presidential election just 60 days away. The party's biggest challenge will be overcoming public backlash over the martial law declaration and the burden of Yoon's impeachment, while also winning over centrist and independent voters. For the DP, which has been eager to regain power since its defeat 3 years ago, the focus is now on when Chairman Lee Jae-myung, the party's frontrunner, will step down as leader and officially launch his presidential bid. Meanwhile, addressing the public, acting President Han Duck-soo said on Friday that he will do his best to make sure the upcoming election and transition to the next government go smoothly. Han also vowed to ensure stability in national security and diplomacy following the court's ruling.
This is a serious moment in history, with a sitting president impeached for the second time. As acting president, I will make sure there are no gaps in national security and foreign affairs, maintaining a firm security posture.
Han also emphasized the need to ease public concerns and confusion in the wake of the court's ruling. 신하영, Arirang News.
Up next, our P&G explains a possible time frame as to an early election.
Now that the Constitutional Court has ruled against President Yoon Suk Yeol, he has been removed from office immediately, meaning a formal end to his presidency. An early presidential election will have to be held within 2 months so that a new president can take office. South Korea's constitution specifically says a successor must be elected within 60 days in case the president is disqualified by a court ruling. And the nation's Public Official Election Act says the day of the election must be publicly announced by the president or acting president by not later than 50 days before the election day. This means since the court ruled against Yoon on April 4th, acting President Han Duck-soo must announce an election day before April 14th. The National Election Commission has already said that if a snap election were to take place, it would be sometime between May 24th and June 3rd. But it's widely believed that the election will be held on June 3rd, exactly 60 days after the ruling, to give parties as much time as possible to prepare for elections and leave some time for campaigning. Another reason is that June 3rd is a Tuesday. Mondays and Fridays are usually not seen as viable options for an election day due to fear of low voter turnouts, as voters are less likely to head to polls right before or after weekends. And this is not the first time South Korea is holding a snap election. 8 years ago, an early presidential election was held after former President Park Geun-hye was removed from office over a corruption scandal. The court ruled against Park on March 10, 2017, and most parties registered their candidates to run for the presidential election from March 31st to April 4th. Then the election was held on May 9th, exactly 60 days after the Constitutional Court's ruling. So just as was the case in 2017, the country is likely to set aside a full 2 months to prepare for an election to choose its next president.
Protesters both for and against the impeachment took to the streets on this day too. Once the ruling was delivered, their reactions were in sharp contrast. Park Gun-woo reports.
Joy on side, despair on the other, following the Constitutional Court's decision on President Yoon's impeachment on Friday. Thousands of pro-impeachment protesters who mainly gathered near Anguk Station, the closest station to the court, erupted in cheers immediately after the ruling. Celebrating the outcome and expressing relief, they shouted, "We won," as their long-held wishes were finally granted. People were seen jumping, singing, and hugging each other in joy. Yoon's supporters, on the other hand, who had largely relocated to Hannam-dong near the presidential residence, voiced their outrage, some even crying. Protests there grew increasingly fierce, though most had ended by the afternoon. One supporter even smashed a police vehicle near the Constitutional Court with a baton after the decision was made. He was later caught and arrested by the police for damaging public property and is expected to face charges. But fortunately, no large-scale riots broke out at demonstration sites, as had been feared. With tensions still high, the highest emergency level kapo remained in place throughout the day before being lifted at 6 p.m. on Friday. It was then lowered to Ulho, the second highest level, allowing 50% mobilization of police forces. Over 200 riot police units with more than 14,000 personnel were dispatched in Seoul, along with special forces also on duty to prevent terrorist or drone attacks. A 150-meter radius around the Constitutional Court has been locked down with police vehicles, designating the area as a vacuum zone, but began partially opening later in the day. Stations including Anguk as well as Hangangjin, located near the presidential residence, were temporarily closed, but later reopened. Seoul Mayor Oh Se-un also inspected areas where demonstrations had taken place on Friday, saying there were no major issues. However, he asked for close monitoring of the situation until it calms down, even through the weekend. Park Gun-woo, Arirang News.
The international media has been quick to cover the court's verdict, calling the event a pivotal moment in South Korea's democracy. Kim Bo-kyung recaps the foreign media response.
Foreign media outlets were quick to deliver the Constitutional Court's ruling to oust President Yoon Suk Yeol. Reuters said Yoon lost a reckless gamble with martial law, while the New York Times said the Constitutional Court's decision cleared the way for South Korea to elect a new leader after months of political turmoil that has tested its democratic guardrails. British daily newspaper The Guardian and public broadcaster the BBC focused on the country's democracy. Calling the day momentous, The Guardian said the fear sparked by Yoon's martial law declaration has been answered with his removal from office, and that the historic verdict will be remembered as a crucial moment in South Korea's democratic journey. The BBC, too, emphasized how the declaration of martial law was an attack to the heart of the country's democracy, but was able to eventually survive. Many others, including the Financial Times, laid out a roadmap of what would come next, explaining that a presidential election must be held within 60 days, with others like Bloomberg pointing out a series of challenges the country's next leader would have to deal with, including contending with Washington's escalated global tariff campaign. Meanwhile, Japanese Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba talked about the ruling with a parliamentary committee, saying while the upcoming presidential election is South Korea's democracy to decide, he stated that the two countries' ties are extremely important, considering it not just from a security perspective, but also for regional peace and stability. He further highlighted Seoul-Tokyo relations, especially in that this year marks the 60th anniversary of the normalization of diplomatic ties. Japanese public broadcaster NHK and local newspapers such as Yomiuri, Asahi, and Nihon Keizai Shimbun all reported the news as breaking stories via their online editions. Some, including the Nikkei, raised concerns over the impact on the previously favorable South Korea-Japan relationship. The Chinese public showed strong interest in the ruling as well, with keywords related to Yoon losing the presidency being among the top trending searches on Chinese portal sites and social media platforms, while state-run media outlet Xinhua swiftly issued a breaking news report almost simultaneously with the court's ruling. Kim Bo-kyung, Arirang News.
The local currency strengthened against the greenback on Friday, driven by the dollar's weakness and eased political uncertainties. Moon Ji-young explains.
The Korean won strengthened on Friday, trading against the US dollar at 1,434.1 Korean won at 3:30 p.m., down 32.91 from the previous day. The local currency saw a brief spike against the greenback, trading at 1,430.2 per US dollar at one point, as the Constitutional Court was delivering its ruling to oust President Yoon Suk Yeol.
This depreciation of the US dollar can be primarily attributed to the concerns over an economic slowdown in the US, in addition to the strengthening of the Korean won, driven by eased political uncertainties.
Meanwhile, the benchmark KOSPI lost 21.28 points or 0.86% to close at 2,465.42. As Trump announced that tariff on chips will start quote, very soon on April 3rd local time, semiconductors led a decline, with market bellwether Samsung Electronics falling 2.6% and its rival SK Hynix tumbling nearly 6.4%. On the same day, the so-called F4 gathering of top financial officials, including Finance Minister Choi Sang-mok, convened to assess market conditions following the court ruling. The officials concluded that there were no significant changes after the ruling and reaffirmed their commitment to addressing the increasing pressures on domestic companies and the economy resulting from U.S. tariffs. They highlighted the necessity of passing a supplementary budget of 10 trillion won, roughly $6.9 billion to the National Assembly. Moon Ji-young, Arirang News.
Confusion emerged over the Trump administration's new tariffs set for South Korea. But now the White House officially says the tax rate is set at 25%, not 26%, as previously notified. Meanwhile, Wall Street saw its worst drop since the pandemic 5 years ago, following the tariff announcement. Lee Soo-jin tells us more.
The reciprocal tariff imposition on South Korea has been finalized at 25%. On Thursday local time, the annex to the executive order on the White House website was amended to 25% from 26%. The amendment was made without a clear explanation. This comes after a panel presented by U.S. President Donald Trump at a Rose Garden event the day before listed the reciprocal tariff on South Korea as 25%, while the annex of the executive order stated as 26%, causing confusion about the discrepancy. When the White House initially did not indicate any intention to make a correction, the South Korean government demanded one, arguing that under Trump's formula, Korea's tariff rate should be 25% and not 26%. And this 1% difference is significant as it amounts to roughly $1.3 billion. Meanwhile, the impact of the announcement of Trump's larger-than-expected tariffs was immediate in stock markets, with Wall Street on Thursday seeing its worst day since the COVID-19 pandemic in 2020. The S&P 500 plunged nearly 5% and the Dow Jones 4%, both suffering the biggest one-day drop since June 2020. And the tech-heavy Nasdaq dropped nearly 6%, the largest decline since March 2020. Trump, however, in response to a question about the severe impact of his tariffs, dismissed concerns.
The markets are going to boom, the stock is going to boom, the country is going to boom, and the rest of the world wants to see, is there any way they can make a deal?
But market analysts are less optimistic.
It is nerve-wracking to watch markets go down by a couple of % in a day, but my career spans back to the 1987 crash. So this one still ranks up there as very concerning anytime markets are down with this amount of vehemence, if you will, especially on unexpected news. It's worrisome.
Analysts say the sharp decline reflects investor concerns that U.S. companies reliant on global supply chains could soon be subject to retaliatory measures from trading partners. In the meantime, Trump says he's open to negotiations. Lee Soo-jin, Arirang News.
And against the backdrop of heightened trade uncertainties, the foreign ministers of South Korea, the U.S., and Japan sat down in Brussels on the margins of a NATO meeting. Lee Seung-jae covers their agenda.
The top envoys of Seoul, Washington, and Tokyo held talks in Brussels on Thursday, a day after U.S. President Donald Trump announced his reciprocal tariffs. The meeting between Foreign Minister Cho Tae-yeol, U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio, and Japanese Foreign Minister Takeshi Iwaya took place on the sidelines of a foreign ministerial meeting of members of NATO and its partner countries. According to Seoul's foreign ministry, Cho expressed deep concern over the U.S. reciprocal tariffs, asking the U.S. to consider the implications for the alliance as well as investments in the U.S. In response, Rubio reiterated President Trump's stance that the reciprocal tariffs have been introduced to readjust the trade imbalance. However, the U.S. Secretary of State stressed that it's now important to hold new negotiations based on the readjusted levies, raising the possibility that talks could take place between Seoul and Washington on adjusting the 25% tariff. Meanwhile, Foreign Minister Cho also called for cooperation among NATO member countries in dealing with the North Korea-Russia military alliance, which he says could lead to a security decoupling between the U.S. and its allies. He further called on member countries to prevent Pyongyang from believing it can secure advanced military technology that can directly threaten the global community. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
The Ministry of Unification welcomed Thursday's adoption of the North Korean Human Rights Resolution at the United Nations Human Rights Council. The ministry on Friday expressed deep concern over ongoing human rights violations in North Korea. It called for action on issues such as the forced repatriation of defectors and the release of South Koreans detained in the north, including 3 missionaries. Seoul also raised concerns about forced labor and the inhumane conditions faced by North Korean troops sent to Russia. This marks 23 years in a row the resolution has been adopted, with consensus since 2016. Earlier this week, we covered the beautiful sights and sounds of spring. And we have more related coverage today as our An Sung-jin made her way to a cherry blossom festival.
Spring has returned. Streets filled with cherry blossoms greet those who have made their way to Jinhae district in the south coast city of Changwon. The 63rd Jinhae Gunhangjae, which lasts for 9 days, is the mecca of spring cherry blossoms, with more than 2 million visitors every year.
The cherry blossom, a symbol of spring here, is already reaching its peak here. People are out here with their family and friends to enjoy the beautiful colors and its scenery.
We're so happy to be back in Jinhae. We were here in 2013, just the 2 of us, and now we're here with our 3 kids. Beautiful weather and the cherry blossoms are in full bloom. It's beautiful.
I am so proud that in our country and here in Jinhae, there is such a beautiful spring blossom path.
We are in our last year of high school, so we originally came out here for graduation photos, but it feels so refreshing to see all these pretty blossoms.
The town's top cherry blossom spots including Gyeonghwa Station, an old closed-down railway station and its train tracks, as well as the Yeojacheon stream. Most areas in the south of the country have seen cherry blossoms bloom, yet with the sudden colder breeze in some areas, especially up north, they still need some time to fully bloom. Following the recent devastating wildfires in Gyeongsangbuk-do province, the festival has been reduced in scale. However, the festival still offers ample scenery while promoting local culture and boosting business in the small town. So for those who missed out this time around, make sure to be ready for next year. An Sung-jin, Arirang News, Jinhae.
It is Cheongmyeong on the traditional calendar, which means the sky becomes clear. Clear skies appeared across the country all day with large daily temperature gaps. These gaps will be much smaller in Seoul, with 8 degrees Celsius in the morning and only 12 degrees during the day. In other areas, there will be temperature swings of around 10 degrees. Meanwhile, the atmosphere continues to be dry. Currently, a dry weather advisory is in place in Gyeongsangbuk-do province with strong winds. Please take extra precautions not to start wildfires. Tomorrow morning, Seoul and Gwangju will start off at 8 degrees, Busan at 9 degrees. Highs will move up to 16 degrees in Gwangju and Daegu, 17 degrees in Gyeongju and Jeju. There's rain forecast tomorrow all over the country. It will get chilly as rain falls. That's all for Korea. Here are the weather conditions around the world.
And that is Newscenter for tonight. Thank you for watching. A panel session up next.